You are dead to the world. Give me your late wife's recipes. I need them to build my empire.
She told her new millionaire in-laws that I died in a ditch from an overdose years ago, just so she wouldn't have to explain why her father smells like fried onions and cheap grease. My daughter Alison looked me dead in the eye in my own kitchen and told me that to the world, I was a ghost. Then, without a hint of shame, she reached for my weathered, leather-bound notebook, the one containing the recipes my late wife and I spent 40 years perfecting, and asked if I could show her how to balance the acidity in our signature marrow reduction. She didn't want a father. She wanted a free consultant for the Michelin-starred empire she was building on a foundation of lies. Standing there at 61, with my hands stained by decades of kitchen work, and my heart heavy with a grief I couldn't name, I realized I wasn't a parent to her anymore. I was an obstacle. I watched her slender, manicured fingers flip through pages that were stained with her mother's favorite wine and my own sweat. She was glamorous, smelling of expensive French perfume, while I stood in my stained apron at Ben's Greasy Spoon, the roadside diner that paid for her Ivy League education. She didn't even offer to buy a cup of coffee. She just needed the finishing touch for her grand opening, because despite her expensive culinary degree, she couldn't season a cast-iron skillet without my notes. If you enjoy stories about people finally standing up for themselves and getting the justice they deserve, consider subscribing to the channel. We share incredible tales of survival and sweet revenge every day, and I'd love to have you with us for the rest of this journey. I spent that evening watching her from the shadows of my small office as she meticulously photographed every page of my notebook. She thought I was napping in the chair. In reality, I was wide awake, feeling every bit of the betrayal sink into my bones. Alison was getting a $1 million grant to open her flagship restaurant, The Heirloom, and she was marketing it as a tribute to her refined heritage. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. She was stealing the soul of a man she claimed was rotting in a grave. The diner was loud, filled with the roar of truck engines and the clatter of cheap silverware, a world away from the velvet curtains and crystal glasses she was heading toward. I realized then that my silence was my only weapon. She wanted the secrets? I would give them to her. But I knew something she didn't. A recipe is a living thing. If you don't understand the chemistry, if you don't know why certain fats repel certain acids under pressure, the most beautiful sauce in the world can turn into a disaster in minutes. I sat there, leaning against my scarred wooden counter, and started planning the final ingredient I would hand her, the one that would bring her entire house of cards crashing down. A week later, Alison's wedding to Julian, the heir of the Sterling Restaurant Group, was all over the local social news. I wasn't invited, of course. I was a, quote, zero to the Sterlings. I sat in my tiny apartment above the diner, scrolling through photos of the event on a burner account. There she was, draped in silk, laughing with food critics who treated dinner like a religious ceremony. Her father-in-law, Arthur Sterling, was a man who believed that if a meal cost less than $500, it wasn't worth chewing. The betrayal took a sharper turn when she called me from a blocked number 2 days after the honeymoon. "Ben," she said, "not Dad. Never Dad anymore. Julian's family is coming over for a private tasting tonight. I tried making the braised short ribs from your book, but the texture is off. It's tough. What am I doing wrong?" Her voice was tight, panicked. She didn't ask how my hip was feeling after a double shift. She didn't ask if I was lonely. I told her the secret, the low-temperature sear and the specific vinegar bath. I heard her scribbling. "And listen," she added, her voice dropping to a cold whisper. "Julian wants to check out some local, authentic spots for a documentary project. If you see us near the diner, do not recognize me. Don't wave. Don't even look at us. If his parents find out you're alive and running a grease trap, they'll pull the funding for my restaurant. Do you understand?" I stayed silent for a long moment, the phone feeling like a lead weight in my hand. "I understand perfectly, Alison," I replied. I hung up before she could say another word. The realization hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't just hiding me. She was ashamed of the very hands that fed her. She wanted the art, but she hated the artist. I looked at my hands, calloused and scarred from steam burns and knife slips, and I felt a cold, hard resolve settle in my chest. If she wanted me to be a ghost, I would be the kind that haunts you until everything you built turns to ash. The following Tuesday, a sleek black SUV pulled into the gravel lot of my diner. I saw Alison through the window. She was wearing oversized designer sunglasses, looking like she was on a secret mission in a foreign land. She waited until the lunch rush died down before slipping inside. She didn't sit down. She walked straight into my cramped back office while I was wiping my brow with a towel. "I need the rest of the book, Ben," she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of greed and anxiety. "The photos I took. Some of the ink is faded. I can't read the ratios for the mother sauce or the smoked paprika emulsion. The investors are coming for a full menu walkthrough tomorrow, and I'm lost." She looked around my office with disgust, her eyes lingering on the framed photo of her mother on my desk. I played my part. I leaned back in my creaky chair, acting like the tired, broken old man she wanted me to be. "It's a lot to ask, Alison. That book is all I have left of your mother." I let my voice crack just enough. She huffed, reaching into her expensive leather bag and pulling out a stack of $100 bills. She slammed them on the desk. "Buy yourself some new boots or something. Just give me the notebook for the night. I'll bring it back tomorrow morning before the diner opens." I watched her, realizing she didn't even notice the small, digital recorder hidden under a pile of invoices on my desk. She didn't notice that I had spent the last 3 nights meticulously rewriting certain pages of that notebook. I had changed the measurements just enough. A tablespoon of salt where it should have been a teaspoon. An acidic stabilizer replaced with a base that would react violently over time. "Take it," I whispered, sliding the modified notebook across the scarred wood. She snatched it up like a predator. She didn't say thank you. She didn't even look back as she hurried out to her luxury car. As the dust from her tires settled, I picked up the recorder. I had her on tape, admitting she couldn't read the recipes and that she was desperate for my, quote, 12 secrets. The trap was set. Within a month, Alison's name was everywhere. I sat in my quiet diner, the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air, while the morning news featured a segment on the, quote, 13. There she was on the screen, standing in front of a sleek, minimalist kitchen. She looked radiant, confident, and completely unrecognizable. The interviewer asked her about the inspiration behind her signature dishes. Alison said, her voice smooth as silk. I watched her lie with such ease it made my stomach churn. She had completely erased me. She wasn't just stealing recipes, she was stealing my life story and polishing it for a wealthy audience that wouldn't know a real kitchen from a showroom. The magazines called her a, quote, 16. One critic wrote that her, quote, 17, was a work of genius that felt like it had been perfected over generations. My wife, Sarah, had spent 15 years getting that sauce right, and now it was being used to fund Alison's ego. She was now a darling of the elite. She was invited to gala dinners and featured in, quote, 18 lists. Every time I saw her face in a magazine, I felt a cold knot tighten in my chest. She was building an empire on the back of a, quote, 19 man. But I knew the truth. Behind the expensive lighting and the designer chef coats, she was a fraud who couldn't balance flavors without a cheat sheet. She was flying high, but she was flying on stolen wings. I just had to wait for the right moment to clip them. The grand opening was approaching, and the stakes were getting higher than she could ever imagine. One evening, a glossy invitation was anonymously dropped off at my diner. It was for the soft opening of The Heirloom. I opened it to find a menu that made my blood run cold. Every single dish was a direct rip-off from my wife's private collection. She had even used the name Sarah's Sunset for the dessert, a poached pear recipe my wife created for our 10th anniversary. Seeing my late wife's name printed on a menu meant for people who would have looked down on her broke something inside me. Alison wasn't just stealing techniques, she was commodifying our most intimate memories. She was selling our love story as, quote, 22 to people who drank wine that cost more than my monthly rent. I decided to visit the restaurant's location at night, just to see what I was up against. I stood across the street, a shadow in an old canvas jacket, watching the staff scurry around inside the glass-walled building. It was beautiful, sterile, and cold. I saw Alison through the window, berating a young line cook. She looked stressed, her face tight with a fear she couldn't quite hide. She was out of her depth, and she knew it. I realized then that she hadn't actually learned how to cook. She had only learned how to copy. Without my notebook, she was a hollow shell. She was terrified that someone would notice the cracks in her foundation. As I walked back to my truck, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, surgical precision. I wasn't just going to ruin her restaurant. I was going to make sure the world saw exactly who she was. She wanted to play the role of a world-class chef? Fine. I was going to give her the ultimate test, and I knew exactly what ingredient she would come crawling for next. The grand opening was only 3 days away, and like clockwork, the blocked number appeared on my phone screen. Alison sounded hysterical. She came to the diner an hour later, looking like a wreck. The designer clothes were wrinkled, and her eyes were bloodshot. She didn't even pretend to care about me this time. She just paced my office like a caged animal. "Give me the stabilizer recipe. I know you have it. Mom always said you were the only one who could make that sauce survive a 3-course wait." I looked at her, my face a mask of grandfatherly concern. "It's a delicate chemical balance, Alison. You have to use a specific ratio of elderberry pectin and a touch of distilled alkaline water. But you have to add it at exactly the boiling point, or it won't bond." I handed her a small, unlabeled glass jar filled with a clear liquid. It wasn't the stabilizer. It was a high-concentration enzyme I had developed years ago for cleaning grease traps, completely tasteless and safe in small amounts, but it had a very specific reaction. When exposed to oxygen and heat for more than 20 minutes, it would cause animal fats to rapidly break down and separate, turning a rich, dark sauce into a watery, gray mess that looked like dishwater. I said, my voice steady. She grabbed the jar from my hand, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of relief and arrogance. She whispered. She didn't look back. She didn't say goodbye. She walked out, thinking she had just stolen the keys to the kingdom. She had no idea she was carrying the fuse to her own explosion. The night of the grand opening arrived with a chilling rain. The street outside was lined with black limousines and paparazzi. I stood in the alleyway, watching the, quote, 31 step out of their cars, draped in diamonds and arrogance. They were all there to witness the birth of a new culinary star, my daughter, the woman who had buried me alive in her mind. I had dressed in my best work clothes, which wasn't saying much. I wore a clean black t-shirt and my heavy, oil-stained canvas coat. In my pocket was the original, grease-stained notebook and a legal document I'd had a lawyer friend prepare months ago. I tried to enter through the front, just to see the look on her face, but a young man in a tuxedo, barely 20 years old, blocked my path with a look of pure disgust. "Deliveries are in the back, old man," he sneered, looking at my worn boots. "This is a private event for people who actually belong here. Move along before I call security." "I'm just here to see the chef," I said quietly. "Tell her Ben is here." He laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "The chef is busy with the National Food Review and the Sterling family. She doesn't have time for local drunks. Get lost." I didn't argue. I went back to my truck and waited. I could see through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The room was glowing with candlelight. I saw Alison moving from table to table, sipping champagne, laughing with Julian and his parents. She looked like she won the lottery. She was serving the appetizers now, my wife's recipe for smoked trout tartlets. People were nodding in approval, taking photos for their social media. The tension in my chest was so tight I could barely breathe. I knew the main course, the one with my quote, 37, was being prepped in the kitchen at that very moment. The enzyme was working its way into the marrow reduction. It was a ticking clock. In less than 30 minutes, the transformation would begin. I climbed out of my truck, bypassed the front doors, and headed for the service entrance. This time, I wasn't asking for permission. Inside the kitchen, the air was thick with the smell of expensive herbs and high-stakes panic. I slipped through the service door unnoticed in the chaos. Cooks were shouting, and plates were being lined up like soldiers. I watched from the shadows of the dry storage rack as Alison stood at the pass, her face flushed with a dangerous confidence. She was holding the small glass jar I had given her, personally adding the clear liquid to each porcelain bowl of the signature marrow reduction. "Plate them, now," she barked. "Table 4 first. The lead critic is waiting." I followed the servers with my eyes as they glided into the dining room. Through the swinging doors, I saw the head critic, a man known for destroying careers with a single sentence, lift a silver spoon. At first, the sauce looked magnificent, deep, glossy, and rich. But as the warmth of the heat lamps hit the enzyme and the oxygen in the room began to react, the disaster started. 10 minutes passed. I moved closer to the kitchen exit, peering into the hall. The critic's face shifted from curiosity to confusion, then to pure revulsion. The beautiful dark sauce on his plate was beginning to separate. The fats were congealing into oily white clumps, while the rest of the liquid turned a sickly, translucent gray. It looked like something pulled from a sewer pipe. I heard a gasp from a woman at the next table. "Oh my God, what is that smell?" she whispered. The enzyme didn't just break the texture, it released a sharp, metallic odor when it interacted with the wine reduction. Alison, noticing the commotion, rushed out to the floor, her smile frozen in a mask of horror. She looked at the plates, her hands beginning to shake. She grabbed a spoon from a side station and tasted it. The look of sheer terror on her face was better than any paycheck I'd ever received. She realized in that second that her quote 41 had just committed a public execution of her reputation. The dining room fell into a deathly silence as the smell of the ruined sauce drifted through the air. Alison was hyperventilating, her face white as a sheet. She screeched, her voice cracking. Her father-in-law, Arthur, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floorboards. The lead critic simply put his spoon down and began writing in his notebook with a cold, surgical precision. That was my cue. I pushed through the swinging kitchen doors, my heavy boots thudding against the polished marble floor. I didn't look like a ghost anymore. I looked like the man who had spent 40 years over a hot stove, while she was learning how to lie. "The suppliers didn't fail you, Alison," I said, my voice booming through the silent hall. The entire room turned. The paparazzi cameras started clicking. Alison froze, her eyes widening as she saw me in my grease-stained apron, holding the original, battered notebook. "I'm Ben, the man you told everyone was dead in a ditch. And I'm the one who actually wrote the recipes you're currently failing to serve." Julian stepped forward, looking confused. "Who is this man? "Alison, do you know this person?" "He's a nobody," she screamed, losing all control. "He's a crazy drunk from a roadside diner. Security, get him out." I didn't move. I held up the original notebook, its pages yellowed and smelling of real wood fire smoke. I walked over to the critic's table and dropped the notebook in front of him, I said. Then I looked at my daughter, whose empire was crumbling in real time. The fallout was immediate and absolute. By the next morning, the video of my and Alison's breakdown was viral. The Sterling family, obsessed with their reputation, filed for an annulment within the week. They didn't just fire Alison, they sued her for fraud to distance themselves from the scandal. The heirloom never saw a second night of service. The doors were locked, and the expensive velvet curtains were pulled shut for good. As for me, the fame I never wanted came knocking. Investors who actually cared about food, not just status, reached out. But I didn't want a glass palace in the city. I used the small settlement I got from the copyright infringement to renovate my old diner. I renamed it, quote, 54. We don't have a dress code, and we don't have $500 plates. We just have real food, made by hands that aren't afraid to get dirty. I'm 61, and for the first time in my life, I'm not cooking for a boss or a spoiled child. I'm cooking for people who appreciate the soul behind the sauce. I've started a mentorship program for young cooks from the local community, teaching them that a chef's greatest tool isn't a fancy knife, but integrity. My life is full, my heart is at peace, and I finally smell like success instead of just grease. Alison moved to a different state. Last I heard, she's working as a prep cook in a corporate cafeteria under a different name. She has to follow someone else's recipes now, to the letter, for $12 an hour. It's a harsh lesson, but some flavors you just can't fake. Looking back at that night, I wonder, did I go too far by destroying her dream in front of the whole world? Or did I simply give her the reality check she desperately needed? What would you have done if your own child tried to erase you for a paycheck? Did I do the right thing? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our upcoming stories. Your support helps us bring more of these incredible journeys to life. The end. Thank you for listening.